Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Peter Armley, and I'm the Vice President of Customer Success at ESG. And this is another edition of ESG's Customer Success Unlocked monthly webinar series. And the title of today's session is Causality is an Accelerant to Success. Improve your ability to explain root cause for things like churn and advocacy. And I've got a couple of guests on the show, but I won't introduce them right away. I want to talk a little bit just about the housekeeping. So if you're new to the webinar, you should know that we invite questions through the session. So I will have a slot at the end to entertain questions, but feel free to pop questions into the Q&A chat window, and we will bring those in if we feel they're relevant in the moment of that particular conversation. And I really encourage you to do that. We've got a lot of really good engagement in all of our sessions by engaging that way. Let us know where you're from, where you're dialing in, where you're calling in from, and we're happy to see people from joining all over the world. I really appreciate that, and yeah, really want to thank you for joining us. This series is popular. We enjoy the audience. It's very engaging, and we encourage everyone to keep coming back once a month. So let me just introduce the two guests. I'll start with Mark. Mark Stouse is the chairman and CEO of Proof Analytics. It's the only AI native platform that enables go-to-market teams to plan, predict, prove, and pivot their investments in real time. I'm reading from Mark's bio. With over 26 years of experience in marketing, communications, and strategy, Mark has a passion for transforming go-to-market performance with data-driven insights and agile decision-making. In addition to Proof, Mark has been a senior executive at Compaq, HP, Honeywell, and BMC Software. Before I introduce the other guest, I want to just say something about Mark. In my interactions, first became aware of Mark was back in the early 2000s. He didn't know me. I didn't really know him, but I was aware of him because we both worked at BMC Software at the time. And I was a senior manager, director in a variety of organizations, sales, product, and premier support. And Mark was the very lofty chief communications officer for the company. And I mention this because at the time, BMC was transitioning its business from being a low-level bits and bytes type of product company that focused on solutions for monitoring and managing operating systems, database systems, and communication networks. They were trying to elevate the value to higher levels of the business world by trying to tie all these capabilities together into a single interface. And the marketing tagline was business service management. It did this in part because it saw the trajectory of business was moving towards the cloud. IT would never be the same, and the company needed to change. And was it a simple marketing play? No. It meant an entire rework of the products, internal enablement, marketing collateral, organizational structure, makeup of the teams, and the people themselves. So it was my first exposure to such massive transformation. Now for my other guest, Stephen Streich. Stephen's is with Oracle. Everyone knows who Oracle is. I don't need to tell you who they are. He's the Group Vice President of Product Management responsible for Oracle marketing and customer data platform applications, as well as the next generation of cross-pillar engineered experiences that are being built as part of the Oracle Fusion Marketing Suite. In addition to Oracle, Stephen has worked at CA Technologies, Sapphire Consulting, and was in senior leadership roles at Eloqua and Path Factory. So I worked with Stephen first back in 2011, while we're both at Eloqua prior to its acquisition by Oracle. At the time, similarly, but on a smaller scale, Eloqua was trying hard to expand beyond its very strong core value as an email automation engine to become a broader marketing automation engine, one that addressed the full needs of modern marketers and one that would include a fuller range of multi-channel and multimodal capabilities. You can imagine the complexity that introduced into engineering, but also into how sales sold, how marketing marketed, how we in Premier Support coached our strategic clients, et cetera, et cetera. It was my second major experience with a company transformation. What impressed me about Stephen at the time, besides its irrepressible optimism, was that in the daily stand-ups hosted by our VP of Client Experience, my boss, Stephen representing the product team would come well-equipped to provide constructive commentary for each one of the red and yellow accounts. we were focusing on that day. I never detected defensiveness or a resistance to collaborate that I would sense in some of the others. So, Stephen, that's a strong memory for me of what truly collaboration stands for. And so, audience, we're going to talk for about 45 minutes. I'll have some questions for each of these guests, and we'll hopefully have a really rich conversation about this topic of causality. And like I mentioned at the end, we'll have a Q&A, but at the very end, I ask all of our guests at each show for a book that they recommend, and hope you stick around for that. So let's start. I have questions kind of split up into 3 areas now, and I want to start with the basics, like a definition of causality. And so I want to start with Mark, because you talk about it a lot on LinkedIn. And, there's a dictionary definition, which is really straightforward. And maybe you can say what that is, and then maybe elaborate a little bit on what you think. Yeah, just talk a little bit more about causality.
So causality is a technical term, right? And if you're a data scientist or somebody like that, you're going to be very familiar with that term. Really, in plain language, we're talking about cause and effect, right? And more specifically, provable cause and effect. And even more specifically, we need to really understand that we live in a probabilistic world. There are some areas, the law of gravity is a great example, that are highly deterministic. Deterministic means it's going to happen that way every time, and how you feel about it really doesn't matter. So that's determinism. But most of what we see is highly probabilistic. And so a really shorthand version of that is we're all bookies, right? We're all running book on countless areas of our life and our work. And it's really about saying, okay, based on my understanding of cause and effect in the past, my future cause and effect combinations have a certainty level of X, right? And beyond that, it's a little up in the air, but that's true for climate change, right? Even though we're seeing a narrowing between the variables, there's still stuff that's happening all the time in climate change that we did not anticipate because we did not fully understand causality in that situation. So that's really what it is.
Yeah, I think about it as a way when I talk to customer success teams about what's happening in their business and why it's such a struggle. Sometimes I try to remind them of the larger forces at work that are outside their control, that still have huge impact on what they're trying to do and what they were maybe worked successfully in the past, but are less successful now. And that you cannot ignore these things. You can't say, I'm just going to plow ahead with what worked before, ignoring these forces that are kind of like really coming at us pretty strong, right?
That's exactly right. I mean, a kind of an ultimate expression of a deterministic mindset is this idea that we are in control, that we are at the center of whatever happens. When in fact, if you talk to anybody in data science, anybody that works with causality at all, 2/3, 70%, somewhere in that zone of any given causal model is externalities. It's stuff you don't control. I refer to it a lot as the wave, capital W, right? And you're seeking to surf that wave. We all are, right? But we don't have any hope and should not have any expectation of controlling that wave. The best that we can do is understand it better and better and better, and build feedback loops, which are these models, right, between ourselves and the wave, so that when we sense something under the board that's happening, the surfboard, we know kind of what to do next, so that our odds of finishing with a flourish on the beach go way up, and the likelihood of wiping out goes down.
No.
I would just finish with this one statement. Anyone who says, you know, think of any game, any professional game that's played, professional sports that's played, but kind of an archetype, statistically speaking, would be American baseball, right? Players, so this is the absolute apex of the game. That's number one. So everybody that's on that field is really good. Number two, if you have a batting average in the 350 range, okay, you're almost assured of going into the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
We're now talking about a person that strikes out 2/3 of the time. We're talking about somebody that, if we were in an academic setting, would have an F. Okay. So let's just kind of like put this in perspective, right? And say, okay, you know what? That's really the world we live in, and we need to behave accordingly.
You
Very
can
good.
even extend that analogy to, I'm sure a lot of people are, familiar with the idea of Moneyball and the fact that it's the team that wins the game. And so you put a good player in amongst a bad team, or somebody that doesn't get that person on base. It changes the whole dynamic as well. So I think you're spot on, Mark. Like it's kind of like the saying of all models are wrong, some are useful. Right.
Right, right,
And
right.
you've got I see that you see this in your everyday life. You make everyday choices around the behavior that you exhibit to your children, and they're going to model that behavior and take on some of those patterns, the influence that their teachers have. All of these things have causes and effects in our everyday life. And if you take a step back and you look at it from that perspective, that you're not in control of all these things, but how to respond. You're conditioned how to respond emotionally when certain things happen. When something that attacks your security happens, this is how you respond, because you've been conditioned to that over time. And so there's this emotional element to it that is intuitive, but it is really kind of learned behavior. And that learned behavior is how you sense and respond to these externalities that you can't predict, but you have an idea of how to respond to them. And I think that you can there's so many analogies you can draw to things like so prior to marketing, I was involved in supply chain, and I did a lot of work around predictive promotion planning and predictive scheduling and inventory optimization and stuff like that.
Right.
But it's pretty intuitive, I think, for most people, without being a statistics expert, that what happened in the past isn't necessarily a predictor of the future if the rules change. If you've got one customer who buys a ton from you, but then they get gobbled up by a competitor, that person's not going to buy from you anymore.
Yep.
So you can't just model it on that past behavior. So you have to model in these future potential disruptions and shocks or waves, into your thinking. I think that we can certainly directly relate that back to customer success and the opportunities for understanding not just how is somebody like leveraging the product or the service that you're providing them, but what are the other things that are happening from a people and process perspective at that company that could also have an impact on its usage and on its success and how it's valued.
Yeah. It can create a sense of being overwhelmed, I think, for a lot of people. And that's why I thought we should tackle this topic, to really as a way to help. And I don't think we have all the answers. We probably don't even have any answers. It's just, I think to talk about it more is important, because I feel like, as I kind of just glibly said at the beginning, that I feel like the only ones really talking about this are really data scientists, and it needs to be shared more, or at least kind of more widely discussed, because there's just so many things going on in everyone's kind of work life. And before we kind of move on to my next comment, I just want to say, Stephen, that when Mark was talking about waves, I kept looking up your background. And that's your cottage, I know, north of Toronto. And
Yeah.
I have a cabin in the woods near there too. And just around the climate change thing, we were up there a couple of years ago for about a week, and 3 days in a row it rained relentlessly. And so much so that our small lake filled really filled and my
Oh, really?
dock floated away. I had to go chasing it the next day and retrieve it. It was just
Well, this is
so it was just really unusual for that kind of volume.
we are on an island, and it freezes up in the winter as happens in Northern Ontario. And some even though I do my best, sometimes the dock gets caught up in the ice and pulled away. So that there's a there's an effect, cause and an effect there as well. Yeah, no, it's I'm a little low key frustrated that my lighting is so bad because I'm traveling right now. I'm in
Yeah,
California and I'm in a borrowed office, but
and borrowed office. That's fine. Yeah, Mark Stephen's in Redwood Shores Oracle offices right now.
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Mark, you talk a lot on LinkedIn too, and maybe it's more recently. I've just kind of noticed you're connecting these things, but maybe you've always have. But causality with effectiveness and efficiency, and I'd just like to kind of have you elaborate on those themes a little bit, please.
Sure. So as we were talking about earlier, right? I mean, a simple way of expressing causality is cause and effect. Okay. So effectiveness, all right, has a cause. So
Mhm.
these are two ideas that are inextricably bound up together, and you cannot know your effectiveness without calculating it. I mean, so there's just some fundamental rules of this game that we all have to acknowledge. We don't have to like them, but railing against them is not going to change anything at all, right? I mean, you can hate gravity and you can say, I'm going to jump off this building and prove, okay, that gravity isn't real, and gravity won't care, right? So that's kind of where I'm going with this. So what's also really important to say here is that there are a number of things that happen in a particular order. You cannot know your efficiency at fill in the blank, right, without first understanding your effectiveness. Part of, kind of like a 1B off of effectiveness is materiality. So part of causal analytics is not just figuring out what's moving the needles around, okay? It's the extent to which, in relative terms, they are doing that.
Yeah.
So you can have 50 variables, okay, that you're modeling. Probably only 3 or 4 are going to be truly material at any given moment. And that's a key phrase, okay? As we saw with COVID, things can really change, right? And what was highly material, in mid 2019 was immaterial in many cases by mid 2020, right? So then you've got this idea of sustainability. So sustainability is kind of like the ultimate output of all of this, right? Is it effective? Is it material? Is it efficient? Are you executing it efficiently, cost efficiently, right? To the extent that all those things are true, right, you have now entered into a place where you have the ability to sustain it. It becomes kind of almost like, I'm using this very conversationally, okay? It's almost like a perpetual motion machine at that point, right? And it becomes self-sustaining until something happens that upends it all, right?
Until you hit the next wave,
Right,
until
that's
there's a
right.
shock that to the system, like interest rates going through the roof or dropping to zero, or
And,
like
and and maybe that's where a lot of let's say it, more startups failed at this in this respect. During the pandemic, they hired a ton of people and thinking that they could sustain their business just by doing that, um, when really it wasn't effective or efficient to do that, and it was all exposed.
So actually, that's a great example, okay?
Mhm.
Because the key distorting influence for the last 15 years has been cheap and easy money,
Yeah.
yep.
okay? If you remove that from the equation, not only would you have a lot less innovation in the marketplace today, okay, but a lot of the companies that have sprung up wouldn't even have sprung up, or they would not have sustained long enough. If you're in a 100% bootstrapping, I'm now really talking about startups and scale-ups, okay? If you're in a 100% or near 100% bootstrapping kind of environment, where you can only grow at the rate that revenue is enabling you to grow, we would be looking at a very, very different situation today. And what is happening now is that the cost of cash and the availability of cash, not just of an equity investment variety, but debt and net new revenue acquisition, have all spiked. Which also means that the opportunity cost on cash that's already in your bank accounts has just gone through the roof.
Mm-hmm.
And what that really means is that I don't know what's an effective or the most effective use of that money. And I can't afford to be really, really wrong anymore, because if I am, no one's going to be lining up to replenish my money, right? And so what happens? Things freeze, they stall out, right? That they downshift. The natural human reaction, absent predictive analytics, is we're just going to not do anything for a while and see what happens, which, depending on the scenario, can either be a really, really good decision, or it can be the worst possible decision of all. And so this is also in a high, so we're in a very volatile, high change environment right now. One of the ironies of that is that existentially, experience means more, particularly if you have experience that encompasses one or more previous downturns, okay?
Mm-hmm.
This is now called wisdom, okay? You know, that helps. But in terms of causality, it's actually bias.
Bias. Okay.
Bias, because just because it happened that way before doesn't mean that it's going to happen exactly that way now.
Right.
So now again, we're back to having to calculate it.
Right.
And
So,
the last thing I can say about it is 15 years ago, this was all part of the norm. And then cheap and easy money destroyed what's called the budgetary business case.
Yeah.
So
I think there's always been pressure on customer success teams and product teams. I'm in a product organization. I've been doing product management for 25 years. There's always been, I feel if you're doing it right, the product managers are always invested in the success of their customers. I mean, that was certainly the case at Eloqua. I think of two things that largely led to our success. One was we caught a wave at the right time. Like what we were building had good product market fit and made a lot of sense. But also we were very invested in the success of the customers, because it was a new approach to the market, and we had to be very evangelical. So customer success was kind of in our blood there, and there's always been pressure to prove customer success. But in times of macroeconomic shocks and margin pressure, and now people are having to renew loans, like we were saying, at higher interest rates, there's even more pressure on it than ever. So people are looking to particularly in the field of MarTech, marketers are not the best buyers of technology, but they've had a lot of access to buy technology over the last 10, 15 years. So marketing tech stacks have bloated, dozens and dozens or hundreds of tools, and they're very siloed. The data is disconnected, which causes a disconnected experience for their customers. And IT, I think, in the CFO and the CIO are starting to get their arms around this more and say, okay, look, the heyday is over. We need to start tightening the belt a little bit. What are we getting for all of these tools? Where is the duplication? should we be rational? Everybody seems to be having a rationalization conversation. And then the question becomes, how are they making those decisions? How are they deciding what to invest in and what to de-invest in and where to focus on? What's driving those decisions? Is it emotional? Is it data-driven? Even if it's data-driven, is it the right data? Is it, is it like, I think a lot of people mistake pattern recognition for causality.
Totally. They're
And
not the same. Yeah.
they're not the same things. It's like, I see this happening here, and maybe pattern recognition is more like correlation. There's always is it correlation, is it causation? There's a lot of things that move exactly together that have nothing to do with each other. It just so happens that they're related. And if you build that into your models, you risk, you were kind of hinting at this earlier, Mark, you risk kind of overfitting the model. You're going to get wrong results because you're using too many variables that they interplay with each other. We could get very technical and talk about the fact that, there's things that are, it's called multicollinearity, right? These things move together that skews the model results. There's all kinds of stuff around the error of these models actually itself being correlated, and that causes model problems. So to do it properly statistically is very difficult, which is why you should focus on, as you were saying, a few things. The fewer the better. The fewer things in your model that impact it, the better. The other thing I think for a customer success professional or a product manager to think about, and this is a little more in their control, is to what extent are we victims of our own confirmation bias or our own different sort of biases? Like, if I run a marketing automation program which pushes all my customers down a particular linear journey, like I always make them download that white paper or attend that webinar. And then later on, I'm trying to figure out, well, what's correlated to opportunity progression and closed won business? Oh, well, if they only see this webinar and if they only attend this, if they only download this white paper and only attend this webinar, that's highly correlated to one business. Well, of course it is. You force them down that path. So that's not necessarily causation. It's what else could be happening? What other things could actually, you could get 500 inbound clicks from Google and from Bing and say, well, they're both performing the same, but Bing's cheaper. I'm going to spend more money on Bing. But then you look at the underlying conversion rate and realize the traffic from Google is much higher quality. It converts better than the traffic from Bing. So that's where you should actually spend your money. It's just being, I think a lot of it is just being more curious and critical about the data.
Which is a perfect kind of intro to a question I have for you, Stephen. I wrote up this question. I said, I want you to kind of comment in your role as a senior executive of an organization. Talk to us about how root cause and causality imbue your thinking about how you lead your teams. And I think it's I'm imagining particularly important for you because you're leading a cross-pillar engineering or product engineering effort, which is enormous. And I know what that means because I've worked at Oracle and I understand all those cross-pillar initiatives. And there was always great hope that would be Oracle's kind of really entryway into really huge prominence in the cloud. So I think there's a lot of pressure on people like you. How does like root cause and causality kind of infect the way you think about leading your teams?
I guess I'd start by saying, if you understand the cross-pillar challenges, I'd like you to explain it to me. No, it is a very large, complex organization, and I think we've made huge strides in the last few years of aligning the product organizations as teams with common goals, which is where I think a lot of it starts in any situation. So in product development, in marketing, sales, service, back office, ERP, HCM, we all are kind of aligned to some similar suite-based goals. And it kind of sounds like, people have been, whether it's SAP or whether it's Salesforce or Adobe or Oracle, we all, I think to people outside of the company, it sounds like we've all been saying the same thing forever, right? But I think we've made some good strides on really trying to unify things. But that's like an internal engineering thing. My reaction to your question was, I think it happens in a couple different layers. There's what are we building into the products to help our customers be more successful? And that, a lot of that comes down to data science models, either of the predictive or deterministic type, like a random forest model that's going to do predictive, like recommendations for the next best content to show somebody based upon their past interactions and any intent signals and what else is happening at the account that we know about them firmographically and demographically. That's one category of investment where it's important to understand causality, and it's important to understand, things like multiple linear regression and Bayesian, like we have data scientists that do that stuff.
Mhm.
And then there's generative AI and other in similar categories, which we're bringing to bear. So there's a lot around product development that is more purely in the math, but it's not just understanding the math, it's understanding, well, if I'm trying to build a model to score the likelihood of an opportunity converting, what should be the inputs? Like where do we get those inputs from? And who has that data? It really comes down to a data problem at most companies.
Yeah.
The math itself isn't that complicated if you are so inclined. But the availability of good, clean data that can feed those models with enough results to drive to to get a statistically relevant or stable or repetitive, what's the word you use, Mark? Sustainable, sustainable result that's the really hard part, getting your data house in order and having enough of that data. So I spend a lot of time from a development perspective figuring out how can we help our customers from a people and process perspective get out of their own way to unify some of this data and have the right kind of foundation for success from that perspective, because a lot of it comes down to those internal people and process challenges. So how can technology help unlock some of the misalignment that happens between sales and marketing, where sales focuses on marketing qualified leads and marketing focuses on MQLs, sales focuses on opportunities, and there's an inflection point where they're not really the same thing and there's not a lot of trust. How do we undo that? But then on the customer success side, it's very different. It's how do we help enable our customers to see the value that they're getting out of the tool? Because at some point in time, they're going to be called onto the carpet to explain, like, where's the value? And can we surface that in the product more easily so that, yes, maybe they have faith that I know if I run these tactics or execute these campaigns, I'm getting results. It's hard for me to attribute the campaigns to the results, because especially in B2B, multi-touch, multiple touches, long life cycles, a lot of lag effects. Something I did very months ago could have an important impact on a result. How do you capture all that? How do you explain it to a board? It's much easier for sales to, show the revenue that is created by additional headcount. It's much harder for marketing. So how do we surface in the product the value that the tool is giving them? And then from a customer success perspective, how do we coach people even automatically to do things within the product or service that will lead to more success, lead to more value creation?
Yeah, you nailed it. On the customer success side in particular. Mark, what are your kind of additional kind of thoughts on that? Like when Stephen's talking, I'm thinking this is like an inescapable kind of silent talk track that's probably going through his head all the time of how to kind of tackle these challenges. And I think that's true of any kind of serious, very intentional kind of senior executive trying to look at their business. And it gets more complicated the higher up you go. And you've been in both massive environments, but also even in your current role, which you're trying to kind of pioneer a new kind of way of doing business, go to market kind of type business. And so I think you have really interesting perspective on how you see your ability to kind of lead without kind of getting too geeky about it and scientific about it. So
sure. I mean, I think that there are a lot of different ways that you can approach this, right? But let's just start with the idea that we tend to operate as businesses from a bias towards economies of scale, right? The more of X we can do is considered to be almost unquestionably, right, better than less, okay? And we don't do economies of learning very well at all. And the MarTech stack, actually, but not uniquely to the MarTech stack, stacks of many different functions are emblematic of this, right? If you look at even Eloqua, things like this, right? It was all about doing more with less money, less effort, less time, less whatever, right? And what did that ultimately produce? It was the law of unintended consequences for sure, okay? But we got more EU and California legislation around privacy. And that right there is not a correlation statement. That's an explicit causal statement made by the EU in the lead-in, the prelude to its latest several rounds of legislation. It basically said, this is exactly why we are doing this. So I would say that I have learned to prize understanding the why and the what over all of the things, right? Once you really nail the effectiveness piece, the causality piece, it's not terribly hard to make it more efficient, to do more of it, if that's what's called for.
Mm-hmm.
But then also you have to say, I mean, this is a law. This is a natural law that I'm now talking about. There's a point of diminishing returns on anything. And this is directly, it's not just a function of whatever it is that you're doing or investing in. It's also a direct reflection of the environment in which this is happening. Okay. But sooner or later, you're going to get to a point where it doesn't make any sense to keep spending even more money in X, right? Unless there is an external change that creates a new demand signal for that thing. So the way that this actually works with customer success, in my view, okay, is that customer success, like marketing, is a nonlinear multiplier of areas of business performance that are linear. Sales is linear. So what does that really mean? It means that if I go to my head of sales here at Proof and I say, guess what? Doubling your number for 2024, it is going to be a very short conversation that's going to end with, we need to now plan on how to double our sales team, right? Because there's a linear relationship between the cost of sales and revenue, right? And it tracks pretty much all the way out. However, if I go to the marketing team and say the same thing, it's going to result in maybe a 20–30% increase in budget. Because the power of marketing, the power of customer success, the power of, another example of this, ironically enough, is data science, is nonlinear in its impact, right? It's going to be a multiplier that doesn't require a lot of additional investment in order to support the same outcome. So it's also time lagged. So that's something Stephen was just talking about, is time lag. In B2B, time lag is super, super important. And it is, while we understand it as this investment had this time lag, okay, what it really is this audience had this kind of resistance, this kind of headwind to this investment over here. And yet another investment we made, they had a lot less resistance, so it had an impact faster. So you really got to see it very clearly in terms of what is actually going on and who is calling the shot, so to speak, who is making the difference. So I think that one of the major screw ups that companies have made on customer success and on product is that they see it from an inside out perspective. They don't see it from a customer first perspective.
Mm-hmm.
One of the analogies that I just came up with, and I'll give everybody, like no guesses as to where I probably got this from since I'm married, okay, is that it's like marriage versus playing the field. So marriage is a highly quality centric kind of thing. It's a qualitative exercise. Yes, there's how much time you spend with your spouse and your family and all that kind of stuff, right? But it's mainly a qualitative thing. Playing the field as a single person is quantitative. It's efficient, right? From a certain perspective, right? How many dates can if you're a real kind of a cad or whatever, right? How many dates can I have in a single evening? Right, as a metric. And so what we're really saying here is that these two concepts also mean who's at the center of this. So if I'm playing the field, I am at the center. If I'm successfully married, I am very definitely not at the center. The other people in my life are at the center, right? And so with customer success, let's just look at the name of the function. It's not called company success with customers. It's called customer success. So the whole thing is qualitative, skewed towards the customer. They get to define whether or not they're successful. Or do they feel successful? Are they, in point of fact, objectively successful with our product, right? We do not, this is like the difference between brand and brand reputation. Mm-hmm. Brand is what I'm broadcasting about myself or about my company, right? Brand reputation is what do you believe about it?
Right.
How do you see it? Right. And the extent to which there's this dichotomy between the two perspectives, this dissonance, that is a problem. And that's a headwind to my business. This can be lack of understanding, lack of confidence, lack of trust, right? There's a lot of different things that factor into it. But I think that we really lose sight, right? We all tend to say, this is something that's mainly about me, okay? And my ability to make an impact, my ability to be successful, me, okay? When statistically, there's a great paradox here because you're really not at the center of your own universe at all. Paradoxically, though, in a particular moment in time, each of us can be disproportionately impactful.
Right.
So it's one of those things where you kind of look at it like there's an old saying that if you're a physicist long enough, you become a philosopher. Okay. Math is a way of expressing the way things really, really work. And so you can't be surprised when math reveals paradoxes in life, right? What I just was talking about is one of the paradoxes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
As it turns out, I just watched Oppenheimer on my flight the other day. You could see that in spades. Obviously, he was the type of person who saw patterns in the world and math revealing itself. But
Right.
yeah, no, it's something that came to my mind last night when I was thinking about this webinar in advance is how important, again, maybe paradoxically, the emotional or how important empathy is to understanding the data. And what I mean by that is, to your point, customer success is not just about the success of the account, but it's about individual success too. How is that person being measured? How are they being motivated? How are they being compensated? That's going to drive their behavior to some extent. Do they feel that what they're doing today with your product is going to help them in their career? What kind of risks are there? Like, do they have a risk of failure? Do they have a risk of embarrassment? There's all of these elements that you have to kind of put put yourself in different people's shoes, and that changes from persona to persona in the company as well, and understand what success means to them. And it's not just hitting a particular metric. And so, from a customer success profession perspective, obviously, I think that's really important. There's a lot we can do today, and we're doing this today in terms of measuring how people are using the product. What are the speeds and feeds? What screens are they going to? What features are they using? What types of tactics are they employing? But that is such a not maybe such a small is the wrong way to say it. That is one part of the overall equation of yes, you want to see usage, because if they're not using it at all, probably not a good thing. But there's so much more to it than that in terms of understanding how, like, the internal politics sounds like a dirty word, but the internal mechanism within an organization. And even if you look at it quantitatively, different types of industries are going to use your products and services in different ways. A consumer packaged goods company or a food and beverage company that is selling cans of soup is going to market that in a very different way than a semiconductor company is going to sell through a partner channel to thousands of distributors around the world. So the actual footprint, the data footprint of usage of a product or service is going to change almost by these account personas as well. So you can't just say, well, somebody isn't using this feature, that means they're going to churn. It's like, well, that feature may not be relevant for that particular vertical. So you also have to have these sort of patterns.
You can say that. So the two big questions, I mean, they're all the five questions are all important, right? But the biggest ones are why and what, right? And why will usually suggest the what. The what, though, will not necessarily suggest the why.
That's right.
Right. And so we tend to over rotate on. We understand how hard it is to know why, so we use what as a proxy. Right. So Pendo, right? Pendo is a great tool. Yep. Right. And it's a software product instrumentation tool. And it will tell you a lot of things about how customers are using your tool, but it will not tell you why.
Right.
Any why that you come up with is totally inferential.
Yep.
Right. And so that's the real that's the problem that we have, is that we tend to rotate on what we can, over rotate based on what we can measure. And we make very biased assumptions on what that really means in the world. Mm-hmm. Whereas if we talk about so we invested in customer success before we had a sales team. Look, I'm talking about Proof, right? Because we realized that if we couldn't help people be successful, it wouldn't matter if we had a sales team, right? And that if we could, to some degree, I'm exaggerating a little bit here for effect, we wouldn't need a sales team, right? And so there is this relationship here with the customer success ideally has with customers. That is the way that I express it today is they are commissioned on renewals, and the sales team is focused entirely on net new logos, right? And the main reason for that is that while it is not a perfect statement, because of all the things we've just got through talking about, the reality is that if there is renewal in a high-touch customer success sort of regime, it's going to be disproportionately, because those people in customer success got up close and personal with those customers, and it went way beyond break fix, into, hey, this isn't going to make me one single additional dollar, but if I help you here and if I show you this, it's going to like transform your world.
Yeah.
Right. And that is the kind of thing that customer success is really about. And it's also the ultimate feedback loop back into the product.
Yep.
It's like a
Yeah.
super Pindo, right?
Yeah.
Customer success is a super Pindo.
Yeah. You guys are like in the last, I don't know, 8, 10 minutes are really hitting at the core. Oh, I think what this, I was hoping to have this webinar produce, which is what is the true value proposition of customer success? And there's kind of words that are sprinkled in there. Mark, you mentioned inside out is the typical way companies are approaching customers. And Stephen, you talked a lot about customer success, and I think in a way that I'm hoping we can help not just this audience, but customer success at large understand there's a new way, a different way to lead. And recently I wrote an article with Dan Sparing, who's the CEO of Alliance Software, on really more around the ideal customer profile, but the go-to-market strategy and how customer success should be playing a more vital role in the GTM strategy. And whereas right now it's seen as more of just a marginal player, I think companies are losing an opportunity to tap into this wealth of access to customers. And that's what you guys are talking about, is the access, this availability of information that, sure, Stephen, you can get it from products oftentimes, but you don't get the insights.
Right.
Right? And that's what I think, Mark, you're talking about, is more, how do you get insights from this information that's out there? And customer success should be the organization that has the ability to do that. And now I'm going to say it's not built that way right now. Generally speaking, customer success isn't equipped to do that. They should be. And I think that's where I would like to see customer success move as an organization more to how it can enable the company to be that kind of conduit of vital kind of customer generated insights to help the product improve, to help services improve, to help sales improve. And I think that's, to me, where I think if we can leave anything with this audience, the leaders in this audience, what are the couple things that they can think about doing to understand how causality should be something they can think about more, to maybe play in that future world I'm talking about. Does that make sense?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I think there's because I think about this a lot, and this is a danger in this profession. We're always kind of towards the top of the maturity curve in our thinking because we're trying to push the boundaries when a lot of our customers are lower in the maturity curve. So we have to remember that for a lot of people who don't spend a lot of time thinking about this, there is probably some low-hanging fruit that they can pluck, if you will. And I would maybe sounded a little disparaging of the data that you can capture from a product. And if I did, it wasn't intentional. I think there's a lot, even in the early days of Eloqua, there was a bunch of things that we would model. It's like, oh, well, they're using a ton of custom data objects, which means that they're trying to really model parts of their organization that it isn't just contact and account information. That means, or that implies certain things about their maturity and about what they're trying to accomplish. And what we have some cross-sell, upsell type capabilities or features or tactics that we should be promoting to them because of what we're seeing them attempting to do from a data perspective. Even if you don't have a human in the loop from a CSM embedded with the team, understanding what they're trying to do and trying to coach them. So I think there's a number of insights that can be driven from analytics within a product using Pendo or some other tool like that. We can do it natively within our own products to understand a customer with this pattern of behavior is either ripe for a new opportunity. And I don't just mean this as a way to drive revenue, but their success equals our success. They're ripe for a new opportunity, which they may not realize, or the lack of activity in a certain area is potentially a signal. You have to be careful. Like Eloqua has something called sales tools, which are intended to be used by salespeople for sales engagement, sales enablement. If a customer has sales tools, they invariably have a higher renewal rate and higher kind of like average ARR. That doesn't mean that the existence of sales tools causes that to be the case. The existence of sales tools probably signals that there's good sales and marketing alignment within the organization. And good sales and marketing alignment is what's driving the success, not the fact that they have this feature. So customer success teams should focus on trying to drive better sales and marketing alignment in order to get more value out of the system.
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
know?
Interesting.
So one last thing I would say about this is that psychographically, there's a ton of research into the way that people make decisions. And the three pillars of that research, as it currently stands, are summed up as awareness, confidence, and trust. And when you're talking about customer success, you're talking about all three, the extent to which all three exist, right? And then all three monetize back into the company in different ways at different times.
Right.
So for example, the relationship between high trust scores and high confidence scores and average deal velocity, for example, is extremely high, right? In a multivariable model, right, it's going to be off the charts pretty much every time. And that is something to really kind of stop and think about, because we were talking about low-hanging fruit earlier, right? The low-hanging fruit for customer success teams is how much faster can your sales team close deals because you exist versus if you didn't.
Yeah.
Right? So this is the multiplier idea. This is the nonlinear multiplier at work. Some other examples of this would be if the mission of data science is to help help business teams make better decisions. The better decisions are measurable. That's understandable. That's quantifiable, right? And that is how much better are those decisions because data science exists than if they didn't. Another really great one is marketing. Okay, marketing's mission is to help sales sell more product to more customers. That's revenue. Faster. That's cash flow from revenue. And more profitably. That's margin. Okay. Then sales could buy themselves.
Right.
Right. And so if you stop and think about it through those kinds of lenses, right? And the fact that causal analytics deliver that multiplier to you, it will tell you what that is. It's just a normal part of the math.
Yeah.
That's really key, right? That's the way to see customer success and the way it monetizes into the business.
That's a great way, I think, to sum that up. And I'm glad we've recorded this so we can kind of push that out there. Unfortunately, we don't have time to address the three questions in the Q&A. Sandy and Ty, we've captured those questions. We'll get the answers to you directly, okay? Sandy is a former colleague of Stephen and I, so we want to make sure we answer her two questions. So we've got a minute left or so, and I would like to just finish it with a very popular piece of our webinar, which is asking these guests to recommend a book. And it doesn't have to be necessarily about the topic, but it's a book that should help inform the audience of how they might want to think about the topic. And so let's start with you, Stephen.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to take an easy way out and recommend something by Malcolm Gladwell, because he does a lot of correlation and causation type stuff. You know, most hockey players are born in the first 6 months of the year because of the way the minor league hockey system works, and you know, like stuff like that. Or I was thinking about it, and there's a fiction, well, it's sort of historical fiction by an author called Neil Stephenson, which some people may be familiar with. He's kind of like a cyberpunk techno thing. It's called The Baroque Cycle, and it's long. It's like 3 large books. Each of them are 800 or 900 pages, but it goes across a couple hundred years of the Industrial Revolution, and it weaves a bunch of different protagonists in a really kind of interesting way where they are all involved in these really pivotal points in history that really set the world in different directions from a technology perspective. But he weaves in a really compelling kind of story of war and love and all this other stuff, and he focuses on things like cryptography and technology and calculus, and it sounds a little geeky, but he does it in such a compelling way and like an interesting story that I think it really gets you thinking.
That's great. Thanks, Stephen. We've captured that and we'll put it in the show notes. Mark, how about you?
So I happen to be in my spare time, such as it exists, for a long time, I have been a very serious, however amateur, historian focusing on pre-Renaissance Italy versus Germany as kind of hotbeds of innovation, right? And they did it very differently. What that has continually meant is that Leonardo da Vinci is my hero, right? And so Walter Isaacson's book, and there are many good books on Da Vinci, but that's a superior one. And it's because in the form of a very relatable story, it trains or shows you, maybe is a better way of putting it, how to think, right? He thought very multimodally, right? Free association. He saw patterns between things that a lot of people didn't see. And it gave him a certain mystical quality to people at the time that I think still exists for a lot of people today, right? Because it's not the way that they work. I think at the other end, right, you and I don't mean this qualitatively, I just mean in the modern time, he's alive right now. He's probably one of the best, most approachable authors on analytics. Bill Schmarzo, who is the chief evangelist for analytics at Dell Technologies. He is widely known. His nickname, is the Dean of Big Data, right? And he thinks very expansively and very humanistically about something that most of his peers approach very mathematically and, let's say, in a very much colder sort of way than he does. He really understands the relativity of analytics versus this temptation that everybody has to be deterministic about it. So anything that you can read, and he has quite a few books, that is written by Bill Schmarzo, is a time very well spent. So those two things if you want to learn something, read Schmarzo. If you want to be inspired, read Walter Isaacson's Leonardo da Vinci.
Thanks to both of you for that summer beach reading recommendation. No, I love it. I'm a big fan of those kinds of books too. And I'll just add, I'm a fan of, there's a professor at the University of Toronto named Joshua Gans. He's an economist, but he's written books on AI and prediction, a number of them with colleagues. But he does a weekly newsletter that I just love. He talks a lot about this kind of stuff. And so Joshua Gans is someone I recommend to people to check out. And so that's it. We ran a little bit over. I appreciate the audience sticking around, actually. And like I said, Sandy and Ty will send you responses to those questions that you have. The rest of you, I hope you join us next month. You'll stay tuned, I should say, for the date and the subject matter next month. But till then, be well. Really appreciate you joining. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.